Hey everyone, I'm Charles Suggs, staff engineer at SmartLogic.
And I'm Emma Whamond, a software developer at SmartLogic, and we're your hosts for Season 15, Episode 10. We're joined by Bruce Tate, founder of Groxio, author of 7 Languages in 7 Weeks, and Programming Phoenix Live View, and one of the most recognizable educators and speakers in the Elixir community. Today, we're talking about the state of career growth in Elixir, how AI is changing the work, what it means for developers at different stages of their careers, and how engineers can continue learning and advancing. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks for such a kind introduction. I'm not sure I'm deserving, but we'll give it a go.
Yeah, well, welcome back to the podcast, Bruce. It's nice to have you again.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been at least a few years, I think. I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with your work, but could you give us a brief introduction of who you are, your background, what is your Elixir story, and what you've been working on recently?
Yeah, that's actually a long question. Let's see how quickly I can get through it. So you asked about first my career. So my career growth, I should probably talk about in terms of languages. So I learned BASIC as I want to say I was a third grader, maybe a second grader. While most people were mowing lawns in the South, that didn't look fun for me. I was writing basic games for spending money. So that's a fun fact. My first computer I owned was a Radio Shack color computer. It had this small keyboard called the Chiclets keyboard, which is kind of famous. And I went from there to IBM. Worked IBM for a while, about 10 years. I kind of maxed out the technical ladder, then moved on to startups. So at IBM, I wrote mostly C++, and then a couple of the older languages like Fortran and COBOL, basically to build interfaces between the IBM's query manager, which was our user interface on top of DB2, which is a database, a lot like Postgres, I guess. And then I moved from there to startups. I did startups for a number of years, most of them unsuccessful, had a couple of small successes. And most of that career was moving from Java to Ruby and then eventually Elixir. And I've written books all along the way, and most of it is kind of fortuitous. I left IBM to join a startup, and that startup was called I Can Make It Better. And with a name like that, with a brand like that, you can imagine that it failed pretty quickly. I left IBM, and a month later, the startup was dead, right? And so the internet bubble burst, all these things were falling apart. So I told my wife, if I leave IBM, I can come back. Because, I was doing pretty well there. I had maxed out the technical ladder. And tried to come back. They said, no, you can't. And I told my wife that if I can't go back to IBM, I can always write. And so I wrote a book. And this was the second book that I'd written. And the first was kind of artificially successful because we sold it through IBM's internal system called Mechanicsburg, right? And this is where you would go to get manuals. But I got one sold to an external publisher. And so those sales were artificially inflated. And then I wrote this book that had a great title, but it was a terrible book. It's called Bitter Java. And this was at the time that Amazon was basically offering books for sale, but there were no online books yet. And so you can imagine that if you got discovered in the right kind of forum, you could bump up the Amazon bestseller ranks really quickly. And this book got Slashdotted. So there was a forum at the time called Slashdot, which is a slash and a period. That's 2 characters, right? And so it got discovered there. And since you couldn't get the book yet, people saw the title and projected whatever they wanted to on the book itself. So they said, Bruce Tate is going to stick it to the man. I wasn't going to do any such thing. I was basically doing what was effectively a terrible idea, teaching people how to code Java by teaching people how not to code Java, which is, if it sounds like it doesn't make any sense, it doesn't. If it sounds like it's a bad idea, it is. So I basically wrote this book and it climbed in Amazon. I can remember sitting in our breakfast room nook because our mother-in-law was staying with us at the time. and she had cancer and she was dying, and she had this womb sucking machine that would kind of trigger and gurgle and just make all these terrible noises and just suck the life out of the house. And but we had basically brought the computer so that she could see this thing that we were experiencing, which was the book climbing from like 2 millionth best selling book on Amazon to 1 millionth. And then we're saying, oh, now we're better than half the books on Amazon. It kept climbing and climbing, to the top 200 in technical books, to the top 100 of all books, to number 7 between Grisham and Hawkins for 1 hour. So
That's a win.
that book established me on the technical speaking circuit. And then people read the book and it kind of immediately fell off of those lists, right? They said, this thing is terrible. It's actually still the highest ranked, worst reviewed book I've ever had. So then I joined a speaker circuit where I met people like Dave Thomas, who was my mentor, who got me into Ruby. I met Stu Holloway, who I learned so much from. Just basically, it was a who's who of people who eventually left Java, right? And then, there were still some great minds that stayed around. But a lot of my great mentors were moving on to other programming languages because Java was just a little bit too ceremonial, if that's a word.
Mhm.
And so I adopted Ruby, which was very simple, and it spoke to me at the time. And then I went from there to Elixir through basically one of the startups. So I wrote a book called 7 Languages in 7 Weeks. And that book was written out of fear because I could see the cool kids leaving the room for the Ruby programming language because it wouldn't scale, it wasn't immutable, and the chip designs were changing. I kind of understood that was going to change a lot in the programming industry. So yeah, my Elixir story is I got to Elixir because it wasn't Ruby, because I had tracked Jose, loved his career. And I wrote 7 languages in 7 weeks, effectively looking for Elixir. I was looking for a language that resonated with me. And that was probably the best-selling book I've ever had, and maybe the most decorated in terms of like awards and things like that. And I think it's true because so many people were walking the same path that I was, and I just invited them along. That's all I did. And so I wrote a little bit about languages like Lisp, and you probably recognize a lot of Lisp ideas in the Elixir language. I mean, it's essentially tagged tuples under the hood.
Yeah.
Just like Elixir is lists under the hood. Its code is data. Elixir has a macro system that's very much the same. Haskell was in the book, and you probably recognize ideas like the monadic systems, which is kind of the imperative shell and the functional core. And, we write our Elixir applications that way with the context and schemas, which are, basically pure functional. You probably recognize the Erlang, of course, and the Beam and supervision, which is the management of life cycles, and like once again wrapped around a functional core. And so all these ideas were my walk from, this is my intuition that took me from object-oriented languages to dynamically typed languages, to Elixir that was concurrent, and then to Haskell, which is a different kind of functional language that's heavier in the math, heavier in the types. And Jose read that, and he was also leaving the Ruby community, didn't quite know where he was going. And that book might have informed some ideas for the Elixir language. And we met in London as Jose was giving a talk. And I asked Jose, what do you need? What kind of help do you need to establish this language? Because it had, my goodness, it had Ruby syntax. It had all the things that I needed in terms of languages to speak to me without kind of breaking my brain from, I have dyslexia, right? So Lisp is a non-starter, right? Everything's parentheses, all the order of the functions is different, and everything reads backwards, and
Yeah.
just walls of parentheses. That just wasn't going to go. And I loved Erlang. I couldn't make sense of the syntax.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking for something else, and I was looking for more modern concepts. So Jose some of these ideas were resonating with him. He tweeted about it back at the time, and we met and I asked him what he needed. He said, we're starting to get some traction, but I can't lose Eric Meadows Johnson. He's graduated from university, and obviously there are no Elixir jobs yet, right? Because the language was pre 1.0. We didn't have maps yet. Everything was keyword list. And Jose was waiting for the maps to finalize in Erlang to kind of move on. And so I hired Eric Meadows Johnson and gave him a day a week to work on Elixir. And that's how I got started in Elixir. And then Dave asked me to kind of champion the books in the Elixir line. I did that for many years, and that's kind of the lens. So conferences, mentoring in the Elixir ecosystem, and writing and interacting with authors. That's kind of my view of Elixir. Not really, haven't written a lot of libraries, haven't really done a lot of contribution in terms of Elixir's core libraries. My work is through the community and investing in youth and in teaching.
That was your first book that I ever read, was 7 Languages in 7 Weeks, which was part of like a shared learning thing at a shop I was working at the time, where we all were we were reading the book together and then talking about it together. It was a really cool experience. And I didn't realize the connection. I was going to ask, the book didn't include Elixir, it included Erlang, but I didn't realize the timing of where that fit in the chronology of the development of Elixir in the first place.
2010, you check out the early commits in the Elixir project. It's right in that zone. So we were both thinking about the same things. And I mean, I'm sure the project was started and just some of these ideas resonated. Or maybe he was working on Lego at the time and was flipping stuff over to something more Erlang. There's a conference talk way back where Jose looks at the first wave of commits and he says, aha, eureka. And then, all the commits fall off, and he called it the Valley of Despair. And then he stopped trying to build the beam from scratch and started building onto the beam, and then everything took off. But yeah, it's like we were thinking about the same things, the same issues. And my goodness, he has made a lot of good decisions in a row and hasn't stopped yet, right?
It really seemed like the right language at the right time, with the internet and the way that things were distributed, and like it just seemed like such a fit for the time. It still does.
And the right language for Internet of Things and NERS, right? And then people did that for a while. And then the right language for web development and live view and channels. And then the right language. I mean, it's like the shepherding of this language through all of this chaos is absolutely amazing. I mean, even like you can never imagine that a functional language would have any kind of a machine learning background, right? But Jose is fearless, man. And so when I had left the kind of the pragmatic bookshelf position when Sean Moriarty published his book about machine learning in Elixir. And Jose had not read that book and didn't know anything about it, and picked up that book and said, this is cool, but we need to do this. I mean, if you're working with Elixir, it's lists, and you can't do random access of lists and hope to have any kind of performance at all.
No.
Right? And then you nest those things arbitrarily deep, and then you make those things millions long. You just can't do that. So he said, well, wait a minute. What if I swap out all of Elixir's basic data types, wrap this with some type of a limited scope, and then swap it out with all these Google engines and all these other machine learning engines. I mean, that is nuts. It's crazy to even try to pull something like that off, right? And he did. And fast forward a couple of years, and Elixir is among the most accurate, maybe the most accurate language for machine learning or for agentic coding. It's crazy. And this happens over and over with Jose. His decisions, and when you combine it with his curiosity and his just steadfast I don't know, his guidance to what's right, to just building the right kinds of systems and making decisions that over and over that are not too much, but have the potential for growth and taking care of users along the way. I mean, over and over and over. And I mean, I used to doubt Jose. I never doubt Jose anymore.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. So, with Elixir's growth as a language, what's the career growth look like in the Elixir space right now? I know so much has changed.
That's a great question. I mean, maybe the most important question right now. Your question is coming at a pretty pivotal time to me. I've had a mentoring program for 10 years that I just shut down because I have not believed in bringing people into a career path that is dead or dying or limited. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a scary question. And it's scary, of course, because so many people are coding with agents. And over, I walk into a programming shop and not just Elixir, probably less Elixir than other languages because the agents are pretty accurate with Elixir. But even with Elixir shops, I see the same story playing out. And that's that seniors are absolutely frazzled and buried under walls and walls of pull requests to review. Right. And it doesn't matter if you have like Code Rabbit or whatever looking over the code, looking over your shoulder. It doesn't matter. Is they're buried under these walls and walls of review code.
Yeah, you're still ultimately responsible.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And the juniors, intermediate programmers haven't been trained to use this new kind of tooling. And so what we're seeing over and over is, hey, wait a minute, I tried doing this with juniors. It didn't work. And then I thought, well, why can't I fire the juniors and just cut off the middleman and let the seniors use the agents directly? And it sounds like, I mean, it's a seductive argument, right? It's a lot of people thinking this way, but I believe that the career path should be the same in 2006 as it was way back in, I don't know, 90 something, 80 something, 80 something. My goodness, I'm old. So in 87 when I graduated from college, right? So it's still the same. We still have to learn. We still have to apply tools. Now we're essentially metaprogramming in English, right? We're writing code that writes code, prompts that write prompts, and those prompts are writing Elixir. But there are a couple of differences that we'll get to a little bit later. So the career path, I would say, is fragile, and I believe it's fragile because we've made a conscious decision to take the gains from this AI revolution and push them back into our companies, into our pockets, anywhere but reinvesting in our juniors, right? And I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem that we have to talk about. Said another way, I think that we are eating our seed corn, and I think that there are some bright spots on the horizon, and mostly because, well, sometimes you can look at the at AI agents as something that can build more quickly, but it's also an atomic shovel. It can dig pretty quickly too, right? So we're starting to recognize that we have to invest in the skills to make this work. And what do those skills look like? We'll have that conversation as we go.
So, on the Groxio website, you described your approach as anti-vibe coding. It is a shovel. I mean, this is the first time we're experiencing this kind of tool and how quickly code is being produced. With your anti-vibe coding approach, what does that mean to you? Are you against people using AI tools, or is it something more specific?
So I believe vibe coding is I'm using that in a very specific sense. So let me tell you a little bit of a story on that one. So I walked into this group called the AI Collective, and it's the first time we've been there, and it's the first time most of the people in the room had been there. and there were probably 35 people, right? And all these people were using AI more than half the time in the job, every single one of them. And so I threw out a one-liner. I'm trying to teach people to code without vibing. And from the rest of the time that anybody said anything, whenever they said anything negative about AI, they would nod to me. Right. So I'm not saying, thank you for the question. I am not saying that I'm against coding with agents. I believe that vibe coding is coding with agents without guidance. Coding with agents without guidance. And I mean, I think I'm not alone in that. I think that probably early in the game, people would have called vibe coding letting, what was it, Copilot? Was that the first editor most of us used? So VS Code with Copilot and the code completion. You could vibe with completion, or then you had like the cursor agents. You could vibe out a whole module. Now, probably if you have a pretty decent user of AI, what they're probably doing is they're thinking about the lines in the APIs in their application, and they're probably guiding the direction of an application. So let me give you an example. If I have a junior who's asking to build a feature end to end with Phoenix Live View, and maybe it's just a feature, and they create the code. So one of the things that they can do is we talked about the idea of an imperative shell and functional core a while back when I was talking about 7 languages in 7 weeks. So the idea about that is that not only is that where most of the pure functions live, it's also the idea about embracing certainty, right? This is not where you want to process user input. Because if you're processing user input, there's a lot of if-thens or cases or cons, right? If it's valid, do this. If it's not, do this. So we try to push those decisions elsewhere, and we try to make it so that your code in the functional core can, when you can compose with pipes. And when you use pipes with Elixir, if you're using them right, everybody's smiling just a little bit more. Everybody likes their job a little bit more. You would take a little bit less money to do the same thing because it's easy and it's smooth, right? But the thing about it is, at some point in your architecture, things start to break. And so you have to say, hey, I need to wrap that code with an idea. In C++, it used to be a value, or in C, it used to be a value. It used to return like a -1 or a 99 or whatever, a bad return code. In Elixir, you wrap it with a tuple called a tag tuple. It's either okay or error, or the wrapping might be something like a chain set, because I need more information about not just that it succeeded or failed, but how it succeeded or failed. So if I'm a beginner and I see an application that maybe is implementing some of the ideas in JavaScript, but in Elixir, it's not going to look like an idiomatic Elixir application. You're going to have nested cases and cons, right? Because a lot of that composition that should have been done in the core is being done in a massive central layer, whether that is the body of a gen server or a controller or a live view, right? If you have a student that is taught red-green indicators, you could say one of the red-green indicators is you should not see composition that has to care about tag tuples or about any other kind of wrapping in the core. Pipes in the core, widths in the boundary, right? It's an easy red-green indicator. It's something that we can teach. It's not something that we had to teach early, maybe even like 2 years ago, right? But this is a red-green indicator that this code is okay to commit or not okay to commit. This is a red-green indicator that this agent is spending tokens it doesn't need to spend because I already know this is wrong, right? Or, I mean, other red-green indicators, the indentation of the left margin, really easy to tell, right? This is right track, wrong track. Nested cases, right track, wrong track, right? Nested cases, the agent has missed something important in Elixir, and that's width, right? So width also has composition of code, but composition through failure is the width statement rather than nesting these concepts. And width comes with this idea that you can stay above the fold, above that else, as long as things are successful. And as soon as things are unsuccessful, you drop to the else, and now you can never kick back up. And those ideas are important. And in Haskell, this was done with monads, like the just monad, and with Elixir, it's done with tag tuples, but the pattern is called functional core imperative shell. And with a little bit of training, you can see how that works. And we can invest in our juniors. And another thing that we have to teach our juniors is portion control, right? We need to teach portion control. We need to teach not how much code that you can produce, but how much you should. So modern juniors, intermediates haven't ever had to navigate the can should, right? Because fingers only move so fast. Their vocabulary was only so good. They only knew so much Elixir. And there were basically guidelines, there were guardrails in place in the Git process to make a commit where seniors would review my work and catch errors early before we come too much off the path, off the rails. Yeah. I'm not even
Absolutely.
sure if I answer your question.
No, I think it's great. You've also written that this isn't just a junior talent problem, it's a training failure. So how does framing it that way change what teams should do?
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying that you need to, that everybody needs to hire Groxio. What I'm saying is that if you frame the problem around learning to code with agents instead of my juniors are failing, my intermediates are failing, my seniors are failing, then everything gets easier. So here's what I mean. So if you're a senior and the expectation is that first work should be finished, right? So we don't submit these pull requests that have patterns outside of the patterns elsewhere in my code base. We don't submit pull requests that have 3 new introductions of the create user test fixture. We don't submit pull requests with 2 different new types of utility modules, right? We produce code that fits into the system. That's a trainable thing. It's a new problem, and it's a new problem because basically you have an exceptionally gifted junior called Claude who's working on the system without exceptional judgment.
Mhm.
And we've got to learn to provide the judgment. So that's a problem that we need to teach, that we need to and can train juniors to do. We can also train the portion control, and we can also train the seniors. Hey, when you see this problem, the problem is not that the code is slightly off. The problem that the code is wrong, and it's inexpensive to build the code now, and the right response is to throw it away. Is to throw it away and say, this is what I need. Here's my red-green indicators. Here's how I know it's wrong. Or here's how I know that the job's not finished. We can reject it very quickly before we've gone over and reviewed the whole thing, right? So the senior is trainable because, we can, well, mostly with the seniors, it's making sure they understand not just how to use their Elixir tools, but also how they need to use agents, and that they're agents that we can do, that we can layer our code in agents the same way that we layer code in Elixir macros, right? We build skills that understand how to recognize and build functional core, that recognize that we need not to use live components and what to do instead, right? Intermediates, we can train to use LLMs as part of a team so that we're fitting into a greater framework, and we build code that matches, that fits into our system. And juniors, we can train these very same things that we've been talking about, the portion control, red-green indicators, and also we need to train juniors less on individual function vocabulary. So that's taking something off the palette. Actually, the biggest part of learning to be a programmer in 2026 We take off that off the palette because we can use agents to help do that work. But we spend more time on API design and behaviors, because behaviors in a version of control, this is what's hard to get in Elixir. Your live views, your Broadway, your gen servers, all these things are behaviors. And it doesn't always snap into place the way a function call does. Because in this case, the function is calling my code rather than the other way around. And I need to have the context for when that happens and how that happens. So yeah, those are some of the ways that we can change. Portion control, kind of acceptance tactics, layering of agentic work, practicing agentic work, and changing the order that we teach some of the core concepts, where we're focusing on more of what an intermediate developer would learn: API design, behaviors, protocols, things like that.
Some of this reminds me of your book, Designing Elixir Systems with OTP, talking about the functional core and how we structure the different parts of our applications and keep certain responsibilities in certain places and separate those from other responsibilities within the larger system. It seems like, that book kind of keeps coming back up as things change. It seems still so core and functional, pardon the pun, to understanding how to write good Elixir applications, even as all of this other stuff is changing. It almost seems more relevant to a degree to juniors now to be reading this book that I think initially was targeted not at people who were brand new to software per se. So as you have a junior who's learning, how do you then see that there's progress being made and ways to help direct that if the LLM is a large part of what's going on? Is it based on now these pull requests are looking more digestible? There's fewer reimplementations of things that already exist elsewhere in the code base. How do you kind of make those judgment calls as a mentor, but then also ensure that the junior is getting the right kind of like leveling up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first, let me tip my hat to James Gray. So all of the good ideas in the book are James's, and I'm not kidding at all. He's really brilliant. My contribution to that book was packaging, voice, and pace, kind of the writing things. In fact, I had not put together that Elixir was a reducing engine until we wrote that book. It's kind of embarrassing to say. When I was working with Chris and Jose on on that first Programming Phoenix book, we had a gen server in it. I didn't know how any of that stuff worked. And so James put together this idea of the layers of the system, the different components. I put together the mental mnemonic: do fun things with big, loud worker bees. Was wildebeest, but we couldn't get a cover with wildebeest because O'Reilly was the distributor for the plugs, or for the pragmatic press. But anyway, yeah, so this book is really important. And in fact, that's a lot of what I do today. And you mentioned the concept of mentoring, right? So I would say that more of my job is mentoring relationships with external customers around these ideas. And yes, it is around that. Elixir is about reduce, about how to structure your code so that first, the LLMs can find these concepts, and second, when they do, it can wrap the concepts appropriately. And third, we could talk about the way things fail and how the fail percolates through the system. These are all trainable things. But I do think that we need to do most of our teaching. We almost were able to get away with doing most of our teaching within the pull request and kind of feature request flow. I don't think we can do that anymore. I think we have to be much, much more aggressive with our mentoring, and people need to see the agentic coding done in the right way and in pieces, right? So, and I would say vibing features is really using agentic programming with guidance. It's not really vibing anymore, right? So getting the right size pieces and getting the right guidance in the system so that it understands these pieces. This, when it works, it's really a beautiful thing. And when it doesn't, it can come off the rails so quickly that you can't wait for your pull request process. You have to be much more aggressive with mentoring and taking care of your younger developers. And when you do, it's we have this perception that our junior developers won't contribute right out of the gate. And they can. They can. We just have to put
For
the right
sure.
kind of framing on the task that we give them and give them the tools that they need to succeed. It's no different than it was before, right? It's just that the cadence is picked up. It's much more urgent to get that kind of help in career growth earlier.
So if the pull request is less useful of a venue for doing this kind of mentoring and sharing of knowledge and kind of reinforcing maybe how things are done at that within that organization or within that application, what does it look like instead? Is this like much more like focused, intentional time around, you talked about showing agentic coding being done correctly. Um, but it seems like it's more than that, right? It's more than just how do you do this with the agents, because it's also about how you're thinking about this, how you're planning and doing that ahead of time before writing your prompts. So is this like intentional time where people are like actively working together on learning stuff and talking about how to do things before they're planning and prompting and submitting?
I would say 4 ways that things are different. You can tell I've talked about this, right? So the first way is that we can't give up on the idea of people, right? Relationships matter. So as you're spending more time with agents, relationships, actually meeting with somebody, solving a problem together, whether it's virtual or in person, is super important. And it's even more critical in 2026 than it was in 2025 because we have this new perception that if we succeed with doing something incredible with AI is what gets a pat on the back, right? Nice job, Claude.
Hmm.
Oh, you too. And then if we fail, we get the blame. We get the blame. We didn't guide it in the right way. So we can't give up on the relationships and the people part. We can't give up on the idea that we have to fix the problem, not the blame. So the first is the people. Second, I believe, is the packaging of the way we train. So rather than sending our in the LinkedIn article series, Preddy is our kind of our model junior, but we can't send Preddy away for half a week or a week to learn OTP, and then another week and a half to learn live view. Can't do it, right? What you have to do is do these in smaller increments. So smaller, regular increments for a while where I get a chance to try a skill and have it break. Third, there has to be enough time where I practice skills and fail with the skills. And fourth, there has to be follow through after I practice and play with those skills. So it's not just use these skills to do your job and let's pair through 2 or 3 sessions together. That's not it. It's you have to have focused time to make an investment. But think about it. Once you've invested in that junior and once they understand kind of the intermediate design concepts, and with the agent, they're able to so imagine if your job is coding the function heads and getting the function heads right. Your job is getting the architecture right, is working with the customer, getting those relationships right, is getting the prompt right so that you work on a prompt until it is going to build exactly what you want. If it doesn't build exactly what you want, you throw it away and you try again, you prompt better. All of these things are trainable skills. But then what you have is not a junior anymore because that combination of the junior and the agent gives you something that looks much more like an intermediate programmer that can be a fundamentally a strong citizen in this new world, right? It takes the investment. It takes earlier investment and it takes investment is what looks more like a mentoring investment than the old school training that all Groxio customers used to get.
What role does AI serve then in a junior's learning? When is it helpful? When is it harmful? Sometimes it will tell you things that are just not true, that don't exist in the spec you're asking about? Where does that fit in?
Yeah. So let me give you two stories, right? So one, Preddy is new in an organization, and Preddy is given Claude a GitHub password and a feature request and said, hey, knock this feature request out. And Preddy knocks it out and knocks out the next one and the next one and the next one. What's Preddy learning? Really not much, right? Not getting any kind of guidance on what's wrong or what's right with the code that's generated. Not getting any guidance about the idea how important it is to throw away the code from a conversation that's gone off the rails. Because the only thing that you can do when a conversation goes off the rails is reinforce the problems, right? I mean, that's a fact. That the way that these are built, only thing that you can do is reinforce the problems. Preddy is not learning portion control. Preddy is not advancing in her career, right? So you take the same person and you have a few mentoring sessions so that Preddy can see how agentic programming works, can see when it's important to drop into the code editor and actually write some code, can see what things are supposed to look like. And then after an hour, after two, Preddy is asked, hey, go build this feature. And when Preddy comes back, you can talk about it. Maybe it's right. If it's right, hey, pat on the back. Let's take on a bigger challenge next time. If it's wrong, you can say, hey, this is wrong. This is why it's wrong. And you throw it away and you prompt better, right? And so you have to be teaching Preddy not just the agentic flow, but also, my goodness, it's if you plop somebody down in the middle of some OTP code and they see this gen server and you see this handle call and don't know what's behind it, and you don't know that this is just one reduction, you don't know what a reducer is, you're lost and you'll stay lost, right? So that's kind of the problem. So what role does the agent play? It plays a role in killing Preddy's career if we don't invest in her. It plays the role of the ability to explore if we make her curious and if we equip her to learn the right things and give her the right problems as she's growing. Right. So it is I have not just a programming agent, but a teaching agent with me all the time. So it's either the great multiplier or the great divider, pun intended.
You've mentioned in work that I've read of yours something called the dividend, the idea that AI has given engineers real time back. But right now, a lot of organizations are spending it on producing more code instead of reinvesting it in growing their people. So how should mentors balance that pressure, that delivery pressure with developers' growth?
Yeah, that's hard, right? So that's where the conversation between us developers stops, and we start talking to management. We should say, hey, this AI has been pretty good to us in these ways. It's been pretty harmful in these. And here's what we need, right? And we need an investment in some of the returns, not all the returns, right? We know that your boss is hearing the same things that we are. That coding now is easy. You just ask for it. You just wave the magic cloud wand and the code appears, right? We need you to invest some of those gains in training and in time. We need time to finish our jobs, to support the people we've already hired, to invest in our future, right? I love the idea of an AI dividend, that we can choose to invest the way that we want to. So that's not the way that the dividend is kind of presented today. Today, it's presented as just a multiplier, right? As a force multiplier. It's a dividend, and we can choose how to reinvest it.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with the path from junior to senior, I know this is something that should be a bigger conversation. And I think that you've been able to to speak to that. Could you just give us a little bit about what your thoughts on that? How we're able to still create a clear path from junior to senior in the age of AI?
Yeah, so I think that the path from junior to senior looks very much the way the path used to if we're making investments, right? If we're not making investments, the path to from junior to senior is going to apply to Claude and not the person sitting in the chair, which is the way that we're thinking about the problem now, right? Hey, the model is going to get better. It's like Moore's law for people, but in reverse, right? You can do the same job with half the staff than half the staff than half the staff. That's a backwards way to look at the world, right? So using that view, way back when we started when Moore's law was happening, we said, wait a minute, we're going to kind of eat all the demand of computers in the world, right? When programming languages got so much better, we said, wait, we're going to make people so productive that we're not going to need programmers anymore. Same thing happened with the engine. Hey, in the Industrial Revolution, when we make all these engines, we don't need all these other things. But what's happened is when we have proven that we could write more and better code, we've invented reasons to use it to do some pretty wonderful and magical things. And that's what I hope things turn into, right? So if we're investing in the career path, so basically it's going to sound trite, but the decision that we need to make is to make the investment, right? It's not how to make the investment. We already know how to make the investment. We know we need to train. We know we need to mentor. We know all of these things. And there are all kinds of wonderful people that do what I do. A lot of people do it better. I think I'm one of the best in the Elixir space. But if we make those investments, the juniors will grow the same way that they used to. We'll be able to give them larger and larger jobs. We'll be able to give them more and more autonomy in projects. We'll be able to trust more and more judgment. And what we need to think about is not junior versus the AI, but what about the junior that's wielding the AI? So that's a much more powerful, because then you have a much more powerful unit. And that's the way I think that we need to think about it. We need to build those skills so that the junior gets better and the junior can manage more and more resources and do more with them.
Is there, I think without directly asking the question, I think we're hearing a bit about the kinds of things that will distinguish talented, both junior and senior engineers in this era. You kind of, the conversation as it's been so far has really kind of hit on a lot of, I think, aspects of that. But are there things that we haven't mentioned yet that you think are the kinds of things that would distinguish talented engineers in this era? And what do people need to be focusing on?
Yeah, so I'm going to brag about Paulo. Paulo is Jose's brother. He works with us at Groxio. And I don't know if I should say it, but he's not a great Elixir developer. He's an Elixir developer, but you put the agents in his hands, and he works wonders, right? The agents become a multiplier in his hands, and the reason is that he is talking to his customers. The reason is that he is looking at the output. He's looking for ways to automate. He's thinking about how to push beyond the idea of programming and into the world. What he's thinking about what his customers need to do. He's thinking about how to not build things that his customers have asked them to build. It's kind of a magical thing. And I am not sure where our career path is going to go. Right? I'm not sure how much of this is bubble. I know that people are already deciding to hire less, recruit less. But if I look at Paulo, I mean, that's the model for me. It's like he's grown so much at his time at Groxio, and he's very much grown into from a junior into a senior in his impact on the business and in his impact on the greater community.
Is there anything that would eschew or that would distinguish AI eschewing engineers in this era? People who say, no, I don't want to use that for, reason A, B, or C. Like, not going to do it. What would distinguish them in this era?
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good question. And there are some places where we don't want to use AI. And there are a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is regulatory. In Canada, I visited the conference there in Vancouver, wonderful conference. And several of the banks have regulatory controls that they can't use AI in those types of problems. There are other types of problems that are related to security, where the sharing of data. But there are teams in the United States that have said, "Hey, our product, the way that we write Elixir, the way that we manage Elixir, is so different from the code bases um, that the technology has actually been trained on, that we do better coding this stuff by hand." Those are the things that come to mind, right? Regulatory and the problem space. But also, there are increasingly going to be people that are conscientious objectors, right? Hey, I love the idea of AI. I'm not sure about one more data center and its impact on the quality of our rivers, on the people in the town who are competing from the same electricity on their electric bill. Yeah, I think that increasingly there will be more people that will say, hey, if we are going to use AI, we're going to choose who we do business with. At least I hope so. So those things come to mind. Groxio has taken the position, we thought about not even playing in this space, thought really seriously about that. Then over time, we came to the conclusion that we needed to touch, if there were going to be juniors, we needed to prepare juniors for this world. And that's what we decided to do. I mean, is it the most lucrative thing that we could be doing? No, but we think it's the most impactful for the community. So, and feeds my soul. And, I'm 61 and I've set my technical legacy with Elixir, and now I kind of would like to work on my social one.
I was just in Utah, and folks there were very concerned about a large data center that would use more electricity than the entire state and use a lot of water in a place that's already dealing with acute water shortage. It'd be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Well, are there other like words of advice or things that you think Elixir developers need to be focusing on as we move forward?
You've been so very kind to let me talk about what I want to talk about, and that's the role of juniors, seniors, about the importance of making this investment. So let's stay on that topic. I do have a couple of links that I'll share with your readers, so we could attach those to the podcast. One of them is the LinkedIn article series that we've been talking about.
The AI coding crisis.
Yep, that's it. The Agentic coding crisis. And the first one is the sludge on the wall. And the second one is we're doing Groxio Lives. So Groxio Lives is something where the community gets together. We talk about a topic. Maybe we do some live coding. Maybe we look at some red-green indicators. It's a new thing, but yeah, increasingly we're talking about issues like this one.
Fantastic. Awesome. For all of our listeners, Bruce is a keynote speaker at ElixirConf in Chicago this September 10th through 11th. You can catch him there. And while you're at it, you can come say hi to Charles and I. If you haven't grabbed a ticket yet, we have a 10% off promo code in the show notes for our listeners. We're excited to be at ElixirConf this year and meet you all. Thank you so much, Bruce, for having this wonderful discussion with us.
Emma, you're very kind. Thank you so much for spending this time with me.